Tuesday marks Equal Pay Day in the United States, but lawmakers are still working to make that a reality. The Paycheck Fairness Act passed the House last week. The measure next goes to the Senate, where Republicans have largely opposed the legislation. Critics say it doesn't go far enough to close the gender pay gap. That gap is a big one. Pew Research estimates women make 85% of what men make. Statistics like that are reasons why Democratic Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro introduced the bill. Earlier, my colleague Rena Ninan spoke with the Connecticut lawmaker about her efforts.
How does the Paycheck Fairness Act really help close the gender pay gap?
Well, what it does is, and I'm very, very excited about it, we passed it in the House of Representatives last Wednesday on a vote that was 242 to 187, including 7 Republican members stood with us. And it's very, very simply, what it does is puts teeth into the 1963 Equal Pay Act. It says that, and this part applies to both men and women, is that you can no longer prohibit men or women from speaking to one another, to a fellow employee, about what your salary is. It says that you can't take salary history into consideration. As we know, women have been paid, and I don't care what the profession is, about 80 cents on the dollar. So it's a simple premise of this bill is men and women in the same job deserve the same pay. And that is not true across the board and a whole a number of professions. So you've got salary history, you lift the prohibition, you provide a right to a private action to sue and a class action. If discrimination can be approved, there's a grant program to help women negotiate, really learn about negotiating skills.
You mentioned the momentum. Your colleague, Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, introduced her own gender pay bill last week. It's known as the Wage Equity Act. And Stefanik says this about your proposal, that it puts too much burden on employers and that it would, quote, lead to open the door to frivolous lawsuits. What's your response to those critiques?
Well, I respond to the critique. You know, there hasn't been, you talk about minimum wage, and they tell you can't do minimum wage, we're going to lose jobs. That you can't make any of these changes, you can't have paid sick days, you can't have paid family leave, because our economy will go to hell in a handbasket. You know, since Lilly Ledbetter, and they said that she was going to be engaged in frivolous lawsuits, the Fair Pay Act passed. There have been no frivolous lawsuits. And that is just spurious. I don't understand, and particularly for women. You know, it's interesting because men and women in this body, we are paid the same amount of money. We have different educational backgrounds, different skill sets. We've come from different parts of the country, and yet we're paid the same. Maybe my colleague would like to see women here, and I would just say on her side of the aisle, paid at 80 cents on the dollar.
I want to turn now and ask you about presidential politics as well while we have you.
Sure.
You represent Connecticut. A woman from your state
Yes.
became the second person to accuse former Vice President Joe Biden of touching her inappropriately. Her name's Amy Lapos, and she says the incident happened at a Democratic fundraiser for your fellow Connecticut Congressman Jim Hines. Have you ever encountered Lapos?
Have I ever encountered? I didn't hear your question.
I was just wondering if you're familiar with Lapos.
No, I am not.
What do you make of the allegations?
Well, I would just tell you, I commented on the Lucy Flores, and I will comment on this. It's a legitimate issue if someone feels that they have a discomfort level or their space was violated in some way. That's real. What the Vice President has said, that he meant it wasn't intentional, and that he is listening respectfully, and he was not intending to do that. So whether or not you intended or not to do that, if someone is uncomfortable with with affection or with reaching out and so forth, then in fact one has to clear that up and say, this was unintentional. I had no interest in making you feel discomfort or confused or whatever. So And I think that the Vice President has addressed that, and I think he will continue to do that.
All right, I want to turn to health care and ask you, President Trump last night said that a Republican replacement plan for the Affordable Care Act wouldn't come until after 2020. You've actually proposed your own bill. It's called the Medicare for America Act. What's in it?
That's right. Medicare for America is a pathway to universal health care. What it does, it's two components really. Is we would auto enroll from birth people into Medicare, robust benefits. We include long-term disability insurance as well. That's covered. At the same time, what it would do is to maintain an employer-sponsored insurance. We have 155 million people who get their insurance through their employer, and so that I think we have to take that into consideration. But what it is a pathway to universal health care.
Some Democrats are also talking about introducing Medicare for all and overhauling the Affordable Care Act. Do you think the presidential candidates should be focused on defending the actual Affordable Care Act than changing it at this point?
Well, look, I think what I'm talking about, Medicare for America, we are looking at longer term and trying to move in that direction. We will reintroduce the bill in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, and I would just say to the president and to my Republican colleagues, they failed at repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act legislatively. They were unable to do it. So now what they've done is they have come around through an appropriations process to try to dismantle it. They are trying to eviscerate it, including jettisoning millions of people who have finally got insurance for having a pre-existing condition. But I think what is obvious is that they have no plan, and they have no plan for a plan. So it really is. It's absurd. I strongly supported the Affordable Care Act. I believe in the short term, what we must do is to strengthen it, to bring down the cost of premiums and deductibles, which are the things that I hear about the most. We can do that in a variety of ways. And by the way, in Medicare for America, there are no deductibles. Premiums are on a sliding scale, and out-of-pocket costs are capped. So when we move to a new iteration, we will look at universal care. In the meantime, we need to keep them from dismantling the Affordable Care Act.
Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.